All right,
You're
good
ready.
morning, everyone. Welcome to the congressional briefing on the School Social Workers Improving Student Success Act. My name is Talia Rosen, and I'm a staffer in the office of Congresswoman Gwen, and I will serve as a moderator for today's briefing. Today's briefing is being recorded, and all registrants will receive a link to the recording. Today's briefing is sponsored by many wonderful groups, including the School Social Work Association of America, and the National Association of Social Workers, and co-sponsored by the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare, the American Council for School Social Work, the American Federation of Teachers, the Council on Social Work Education, the National Association of Black Social Workers, Inc., the School Social Work Net, and the Society for Social Work and Research, and in collaboration with the Congressional Social Work Caucus. The School Social Workers Improving Student Success Act will fund school-based social workers, including a technical assistance center and evaluation. These recommended ratios of 1 school social worker to 250 students and 1 school social worker for every 50 high-need students are included in the bill. Unfortunately, many schools currently lack supportive providers, including social workers and other mental health and health professionals. And the situation is especially crucial as the country recovers from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The legislation recognized the critical need for more school social workers to help support students, families, and communities to ensure student achievement and success. Today, we'll hear from experts on why this legislation is needed, but first we will have video remarks from Congresswoman Gwen. Congresswoman Gwen represents Wisconsin's 4th Congressional District. She currently resides on the House Ways and Means Committee as well as the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. She serves as the Trio Caucus co-chair and is a mother of a teacher and a daughter of a teacher, proudly. She understands firsthand the critical work that school social workers provide to our students. And we will bring up the video now.
I'm Congresswoman Gwen, and I am so excited to virtually convene you all for today's briefing. You know, mental health professionals across the country are sounding the alarm that our children are in a mental health crisis, and many who are facing these mental health challenges are struggling without the support that they need. We need to eliminate the various barriers that are preventing kids from accessing crucial mental health services. As we work to build a better America, we must be vigilant to continue to uplift our children and not leave them behind by neglecting their mental health needs. And we don't have to look far to respond to this crisis. School social workers are already working hard in our schools to support kids experiencing bullying, family issues, poverty, discrimination, and they provide mental health support. My legislation with Representative Barbara Lee, who is a professional social worker, would address our children's growing mental health needs by providing grants to schools so that they can hire more school social workers and establish a national technical assistance center for social work to develop more and better best practice strategies and distribute these recommendations. Oh, I can personally attest to the impacts of a school social worker and what the impact can have on the trajectory of a child's life. And I want to ensure every child who needs this help that they can experience the life-changing impact of a school social worker to intervene in an immediate crisis and to direct them to the appropriate resources. And just right now, we frankly don't have enough of these professionals in our schools, gatekeepers for people's mental health needs. Professional social work organizations recommend 1 school social worker per 250 students and 1 school worker per 50 students in high need areas. But our national average is 1 social worker per 2,106 students. And we can meet our future, our children, by advancing this legislation. So you're going to hear from specialists today, but I just wanted you to know that we're so happy that you've come and you've convened for this important topic. Thank you.
We will now invite some remarks from Earl Hadley, the Associate Director of Government Relations at the American Federation of Teachers.
Good morning, everyone. First, thank you to the offices of Rep. Moore and Rep. Lee for working on this important piece of legislation. The AFT represents thousands of social workers. We see firsthand how hard the job is. We see the overwhelming number of students who need support, and this bill will help to ease that burden. We also represent more than 1 million teachers who rely on social workers every day to do their jobs well. The challenges facing disadvantaged students was well documented before the COVID crisis, but we've seen with the return to school that it's become much harder to be a teacher nowadays. We know that more than 148,000 children lost parents or grandparents to COVID. We've seen the struggle with the return from social isolation, and we know the uptick in gun violence has upended many communities. And as always, teachers are at the forefront of seeing students in need of help with social emotional challenges, with mental health challenges, and they need help. You know, teachers themselves are currently battling to address the massive learning loss caused by COVID. So for our system to function, for education to do well in this country, we need social workers, and we need a lot more. So I'd ask the Hill staff listening to have their co-sponsor Whittemore's legislation. I ask all of you to keep in mind it's important bill as you develop mental health packages. And with that plea, I'll turn it back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Earl. Now we have a distinguished panel of school social work experts who will briefly introduce themselves, starting with Nicole, Other Medicine.
Hi there, I am Nicole, Other Medicine. I am a licensed school social worker in St. Paul Public Schools in Minnesota. I currently work for the Indian Education Program within our district, and I have been working there for 11 years. So I work specifically with our Native students, K through 12.
Wonderful, thank you, Nicole. Now we have Tiffany Walker.
Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Tiffany Walker. I am a licensed clinical social worker in the state of New Jersey. I have had the privilege of being a school social worker for several years. Currently, I am the CEO of Journey Therapy Center. It is a private practice here in New Jersey where we provide individual, family, and group therapy. But additionally, we provide consultation and professional development and training to other school social workers to ensure that they have capacity and support to service families and students in their needs. And I'm very excited to be here today.
Wonderful, thank you. Next, we have Julie.
Good morning. Yes, I'm Julie In City. I'm the school social work consultant at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. I'm a licensed school social worker and have a certificate in advanced practice of social work. I offer consultation and training to the field. Before this was in the public schools as a school social worker, and I've served for many years on the board of the Wisconsin School Social Work Association and president, as well as just finishing up a term as the president of the Midwest School Social Work Council.
Wonderful, thank you. And now Ron.
Hello, thank you NASW and SWA for inviting me to be here. I appreciate being a member of those organizations for many decades. I'm a professor at UCLA in the School of Public Affairs, the Department of Social Work and in Education. And I've been communicating with thousands of educators during COVID, talking about the mental health crisis that we've had and ideas that they have of how social workers could be used to improve our nation's, the children's mental health across the nation. I'm excited to be here, especially to talk about the Technical Assistance Center that could help states who don't have social workers get them. So thank you for inviting me.
And now we'll move on to Damien Wilson. Damien, I'm so sorry.
I'm Damien Wilson. I serve as the National Member at Large for the National Association of Black Social Work. I serve as the national member at large for the National Association of Black Social Workers, and I'm also the coordinator for school social work services in Virginia Public Schools, and also serve as a homeless liaison for Virginia Public as well. And I'm very grateful and glad to be here and have this opportunity to discuss such an important conversation.
Wonderful. So let's get started. We're first going to start discussing school mental health. And this question is for Ron. How do school social workers fit in the broader school-based mental health infrastructure? And can you further describe their role in supporting student mental health?
Yeah, thank you for, again, inviting me to speak here. During COVID in particular, our schools became a battleground and a pressure cooker, not only because of COVID, but because of all the political stresses that we've all heard about and seen on the news. School social workers treat mental health in a very different way than some of the other professions. They not only do mental health treatment as in therapy, the way most people think about it, but we think ecologically. We think about the school's relationship to the community. We think about the relationship to the parents, about the cultural responsiveness and rootedness of the school, about social inequality. We see all those things as mental health related as well and very connected. So during COVID, we heard from thousands and thousands of social workers, both in our research and face-to-face, that they thought that we needed to treat food, for example, as a mental health. Make sure the kids eat, because otherwise if you give them therapy and they haven't eaten, that's not going to be helpful in terms of increasing their mental health. Housing, cultural rootedness and discrimination, work for their parents, and organization of the same, all those are related to mental health issues. And social workers have that at their core and their understanding that go beyond just therapy. The other difference that I think social workers fill the gap in terms of the wide array of different professionals who serve mental health is the issue of empowerment. We start out with the notion that every community, that every group within that needs to be empowered, that they need to have a voice, that they need to have decision making, and our solutions for mental health improvement come ground up, not just top down, so that we're aiming towards a setting that's more welcoming, more caring, and more connected to the communities that the schools serve. That's a little bit different than some of the ways other groups think about mental health, because we have this really large ecological approach, and it fills a lot of those gaps in a good way. Many districts are asking for that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And this is a good question for Damien. How has COVID impacted the mental health of students you're working with, and how have you worked to address it?
When the pandemic first gripped our country, I remember it was March 2020. And at the time, I was in the alternative school. And the way that I can describe it, ladies and gentlemen, it was pretty much calm before the storm. I don't think anyone, any educator, anyone had an idea what was going to happen over the next months and the next few years. And it came and it just went over us, and it really, really gripped us. Students whom I've seen every day, probably I've not seen in a year since that pandemic. So when it came down to it, the mental health of students was already very pronounced. But with the pandemic and us being locked down, not really interacting, not getting those social skills that surely is needed, really magnified mental health. And even with the increase in advancement of technology, one of the things we did lack within the school system is that interaction with the instructor and the students, that one-on-one, that those things that are personalized, and even our metaverse surroundings, that was really surely lacking. So basically, one of the significant changes I've seen with mental health is that we're witnessing across district-wide increase in aggressive behavior, even within our own division. We're seeing more disciplinary action. We're seeing a lot of violence within the community that's also playing out in the schools. We had a situation out in the oceanfront in Virginia Beach. Those are some of my former students. And that really hit me hard. So we're talking about increased violence. We're talking about communities, particularly that have been marginalized, have distrust in educational systems, not getting that knowledge and not getting those resources. And then when it comes to mental health, we see an increase in mental health. We see an increase in anxiety. We see the increase in depression. We see just an overall aggressive behavior in schools who sometimes lack that type of instruction or know how to deal with that. Really is in the front door. So one of the things that I'm saying probably in Virginia Public Schools is that a mental health task force was created, and it was created for identification, to identify symptoms of mental health that many teachers and even some counselors or educators may not necessarily be aware of. And then also the training those teachers, those social workers, those psychologists, even all the way down to the custodian, the cafeteria workers, or anybody on what these symptoms of mental health look like, how they're often manifested, and how best that we can practice and deal with it and address it in those situations. And then it's about the resources. That service coordination piece, which is very critical in school social work. How do we refer these kids and these families for these resources when it comes to dealing with mental health? The mental health episodes have been so pronounced in a lot of districts, not only in Virginia Beach, but just out the country, have taken it.
Yeah, it's really important. Nicole, I would love to know, what are the challenges facing your students currently?
Well, like some of the problems that Damien had mentioned due to COVID, we're seeing our students coming into the buildings where they're struggling because their families are in homelessness. You know, social workers within the buildings are making more referrals to McKinney-Vento Act in order to make sure students are able to get to the buildings, making sure families have basic needs met at their homes. So more referrals are going out to those programs outside of the schools. And then within the school, we're seeing more of the mental health problems coming in, and a lot of this stemming from COVID. You know, students are having an increase in anxiety coming into the school building, trying to figure out, how do I manage, you know, all these people around me? How do I manage all these other things that are happening, and then feeling behind? So we're seeing sort of more mental health things where behavior issues are coming up of concern in the buildings, sometimes physical. So needing more support for those students to address, you know, how do we manage all that? How do we help you on a daily basis with those things? And then schools not having enough social workers to address that. You know, school social workers can help with crisis. And if there's not enough of us in the building, we can't support that enough. We can't be there for the students when they really need us. And then on top of all that, we're asking our students to do their academics. And how do they do that when they're worried about, you know, where am I going tonight? Do I have food tonight? So it's really hard to think about, you know, you need to sit down and do, you know, your academics, and you need to pass your classes when our kids are struggling outside of the school building each day, and then bringing that all in with them. So that's why social workers are there, to help support that and help figure out how do we navigate that system for them. You know, I'm seeing students that are coming in and they're just so overwhelmed with the thought of school. They're overwhelmed, they're hiding in bathrooms. I've had parents text me and saying, hey, you know, my daughter's calling me and she's hiding inside the bathroom right now because she can't go to math class. She's too concerned about what they're doing and not feeling like she can keep up with what's happening. And so trying to figure out, how do we deal with that within the school building? How do we support those students that are really struggling with their mental health at this point? So those are some of the struggles that we're really seeing happening on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a question for Tiffany. So how would you define the role of a school social worker?
Yeah, I think it's first very important to highlight the fact that professional school social workers, especially clinical social workers, We hold bachelor's degrees and master's degrees and are responsible for plenty of hours of postgraduate training and certifications that really bring a certain level of expertise and excellence into the school system that's really valuable. And much like my colleagues have already spoken to, social workers are responsible for providing mental health support and services to students and families. But beyond that, we are really best suited to respond to some of the other needs and some of the other supports of our students. Sufficient housing, food, supporting absenteeism and making sure students are in school, and when students are dealing with issues of homelessness, making sure that they are able to get to school so that they don't have truancy issues. School social workers are often on the forefront with supporting diverse populations and meeting their needs. And not only that, we're on site providing consultations and support to teachers as they manage classroom behaviors and try to build social and emotional learning inside of the classroom. And so we're really the ones on the ground as a result of this broad scope of expertise that we have. We are the professionals that are on the ground that are really providing service to a myriad of people in the school system, not just the students, but the staff, the families, and the communities that support them. And on top of that, we are often the ones who are collaborating with those other service providers, because oftentimes students and families have needs that go beyond what the school system can meet, but they're identified within the school system. And it is the school social workers that are liaising and participating in interdisciplinary engagement to make sure services are seamless, to make sure that services are supported, and to make sure that students are provided the support they need with equity and compassion. And I also think it's really important that we highlight the fact that while we see so much of a trend in mental health because we are in a mental health crisis, there's still a lot of stigmatization as it pertains to mental health issues, particularly within the BIPOC community and within the school system. You need parents and you need families to be on board in order to provide those students those services. And the social workers are the ones who are liaising with parents and families, providing education, providing advocacy, making sure they are empowered and understand their options so that the students who really need services can get services, but that we also are treating our families with integrity and with dignity to honor some of the challenges and the misunderstandings that they have as it pertains to mental health issues. Social workers are the ones who are best suited to do that work.
That's a great point. Damien, do you have anything to add? I'm so sorry, we can't hear you. No, I'm
I was
sorry.
having some technical difficulties and live in a technical difficult society. I was that Tiffany gave a very great answer. I was kind of mad. She took all everyone to say. She kind of took it from me. But nevertheless, you know, as social workers, particularly school social workers, we are the parents' instrument. We are the parents' voice, the instrument for change. I often think of school social work as being like a pot of gumbo. I use this because we have to pretty much bar for so many disciplines and have to serve so many roles. You know, we serve as protectors for our students. We serve as advocates for our parents when it comes to processes so far as special education, making sure that those environmental and cultural factors are very much noted and very much considered when making those determinations. Instead of just placing students, particularly in special education, particularly those from minority communities, we need to definitely consider some of those cultural factors and barriers. Social workers, We often deal with homelessness. We serve as McKinney Mental Representation. We serve as those sages and those protectors to ensure that those children, our students, are getting the best possible education they can, that they maintain stability, that they are not shifting and going from place to place, that they get to maintain their residency within that school of origin, so then that they can have.
Thank you. And now I'm gonna ask Nicole, why is it important to have a school-based, school-employed social worker?
You know, I thought about this for a little while, thinking about, you know, one of the best ways to think about it was thinking about your worst day. You know, thinking about how difficult some days are and how tough some days can be. And then you want to reach out to a friend. You want to reach out to somebody close to you that you can have a conversation with about it. And all of a sudden, they're not there. They're not there to answer your questions. They're not there to help you process what's going on in your head, because sometimes school social workers aren't in the building all the time. You know, there's districts out there that are contracting with outside providers to bring in social workers, but all of a sudden, you know, you can't schedule your problems, right? They just happen. So thinking about all of a sudden that person's not there for you, that, oh, you might have to wait a couple more days because they'll be back later. So just hold on to your thoughts and hold on to those feelings until they get back in a couple days or they get back in a week. Those are things that we have to think about when we are providing social work services that are not in the building. And districts need to consider that about, okay, how can we provide social work within each school building so that those students do have somebody to come and talk to on a daily basis. We all know that consistency is so important for our students. They're so important for our staff. They're so important for our parents. So we need to provide that consistency. So having a school social worker within the building provided by the district goes so much further in order building relationships. So we have to look at that and figure out, okay, how can we get the social workers in there? And how can we make sure that they are there on a daily basis? You know, they're not there just a couple hours and going to leave for another 2-3 schools and then come back again 4 or 5 days later. That's not helpful. That's not consistency. That's not what builds relationships for our students and our families and even our staff. I mean, there's staff in the school that they also need that consistency to know that that staff member is going to be there for them and be there for those students that are struggling. So really thinking about how do we do that? How do we do that across every district? You know, and that's funding, right? We know that that's funding, but we need to make that consistency there for our kids, there for our families, there for our staff. So it's really important.
Thank you, Nicole. And I have a question for Julie. Outside of mental health services, how do school social workers support their students and family?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really important to look at all of the ways in which school social workers helped students remove barriers that stem from outside of the school itself and that prevent them from accessing their educational program. So school social workers have training in social programs and local resources and are able to help students and families connect to resources to meet their basic needs. Whether that means helping a family obtain housing, food, clothing, access to the internet, or problem-solving social concerns, or translating clinical mental health goals into school language and school context, school social workers increase awareness and ability to access services. For example, I worked with a family with a 4th grade student. Because of our prior relationship, because I had been in the school for the daily happenings there, they called me and they were concerned that they felt in the future their student was going to miss a lot of school and not be able to concentrate well while she was there. You see, this 9-year-old had an abscess on her tooth that needed a root canal to solve. They were only able to get a dentist appointment 3 months out. And this is because in our area, a lot of dentists do not take families that have Medicaid as an insurance. And so the wait lists are very long. So I worked with this family and helped them connect to public health, where they were able to get an appointment just 1 month away. However, if you've ever had this issue, you realize being in that much pain for a month is very difficult to concentrate on other things like learning and growth. And so I was able to leverage my school social work network and connections to find a dentist who was able to take this student. Now, this dentist was 45 minutes from the student's house, and the family did not have reliable transportation, but I was able to help the family problem solve the transportation issues, get connected to their extended family network, and they were able to get a ride for this student. So this student was seen 3 days later, and then was able to concentrate on academics, not missing school, and being present and available to learn. This is just one example of so many of how I've helped families connect to resources, which has improved that student's ability to be present and able to learn.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you. And Tiffany, how are school social workers uniquely positioned to support vulnerable youth populations such as foster youth, homeless youth, or LGBTQ+ youth?
Yeah, that's a really important question to be answered. So as social workers, we're not only providing services within the school, but we're providing services in the community. And we're really guided by our person and environment and strengths-based perspectives. So this means we understand the importance of what's going on in students and families' life outside of the school, such as my colleague Julie mentioned. And so in addition to that, equity and social justice, it's embedded in our values and it's embedded in our ethics, which is, supported by the NASW Code of Ethics and how we do that work. So because of that, we're most best adept to support these specialized populations such as BIPOC students, LGBTQIA students, the neurodivergent population, homelessness students, right? Homeless students. We're able to look at the other factors that impact their identity, their social factors, all of the things that need to be taken in consideration when planning interventions such as safety and identity and family and supports and dynamics. We are the ones who are well aware of what that looks like and how to include that in those interventions. And then not only are we doing that work, we're also responsible for collaborating with other service providers. But we have our due diligence as social workers to make sure that we're identifying those non-traditional stakeholders that support students and we're bringing them to the table. And so when I talk about a non-traditional stakeholder, I'm referring to parents, to aunties, to churches, to, the owner of the bodega that sees the kids coming in after school buying snacks. Oftentimes when we are working with students and we're taking this interdisciplinary approach and we're inviting stakeholders, we're inviting other professionals. And while they have their place, we also have to find those non-traditional stakeholders and invite them to the table to support our students. I remember when I was a social worker in the middle school space, I was really working with a student who happened to have an IEP around meeting his goals and taking advantage of some of the accommodations that we were giving them. And one of the things that I knew was that this student loved ball and they were committed to playing basketball, never missed a practice. And so when understanding that, I called mom and had a conversation and said, hey, do you think the basketball coach would be interested in participating in the IEP meeting? If you say yes, we can have him at the table. That's a non-traditional stakeholder because this is a person who has an invested interest in the student's success and they have a relationship with the student, and we can bridge that to see the outcomes that we really want to see. And it's social workers who are able to kind of look at those small nuances and think outside the box and say, hey, let's bring this person to the table so that we can really see the results that we want and not only ensure the academic success of our students, but make sure that we are serving and addressing their needs holistically. We're looking at character development. We're looking at critical thinking. We're looking at understanding their family dynamics. We're making sure that they understand how to build and maintain relationships so that the work that they're doing in school is an opportunity to build skills that are going to transfer in other areas of their life as they go through our education system.
That's a great point. I love that. Julie, can you talk about what are some of the barriers for school districts looking to hire and retain school social workers?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Though Wisconsin has focused in increasing the number of school social workers in the last 5 years, only 33% of school districts have even one school social worker. 33%. So this is not because districts don't want to hire school social workers. For many schools, they do not have the funding available to pay for a school social worker. Others are not aware of the skill set that we offer, the ways in which we boost positive school climate, student and staff well-being, and support improved academic outcomes. For others, even once they secure support and funding to hire a school social worker, unfortunately, there are not enough highly qualified, trained school social workers available as applicants. So this is especially true for our more rural areas. We have seen that rural areas of our state have smaller pools of applicants and often lose applicants to larger districts that have more competitive salaries. And then once the school social worker is hired, this school social worker might be the only one in the area, meaning they'll have high caseloads and are often assigned other duties really beyond the scope of school social work. So the retention of school social workers is further challenging when a district has only one school social worker, or it's a district that's never had school social workers before. Because there are no school social workers to mentor or support the school social workers, and there's not necessarily other professionals with whom to consult on practice issues. That school social worker can feel isolated and even overwhelmed. So for example, I worked in a district where there was only one other school social worker, and when she was hired, she was the first in the district, and that was just 2 years prior to that. So when we tried to figure out how to provide effective services, I didn't always feel sure of which direction to move. But the district did provide a mentor to me as required for new educators. And she was a lovely person, but her training and background was as a music teacher. So she was not able to provide mentorship to me in school social work practice. Additionally, when I was evaluated at the end of the year, the director used an evaluation rubric created for a classroom teacher. So instead of a school social work specific tool. And this process did not evaluate my actual performance as a school social worker, and it did not serve as a guide for future growth. Districts that have never had school social workers would be well served to have a technical assistance center with whom to consult about their job descriptions, experience and skill sets, and to provide mentoring for new professionals. School social workers new to the field or serving as the only school social worker in the area could have a place to consult, learn about evidence-based interventions, and problem-solve practice concerns. So in addition to providing funding, this bill would provide a technical assistance center, which would provide necessary support at many system levels for the practice of school social work, ultimately benefiting students, families, and school systems.
Thank you, Julie. And Ron, this is a great segue. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of the Technical Assistance Center?
Yeah, I'm so excited about this part. As you can imagine, I'm a researcher from UCLA, but the other speakers, Julie, Tiffany, Nicole, Earl, everybody who's talked so far have articulated in a real meaningful way how complex our role is. It's not just sitting in a therapy office room. We do so many other things related to mental health and to thriving and to making our communities really grow in the most positive, ideal way. And that's why this Technical Assistance Center is so important, because our image of a Technical Assistance Center is not just helping the individual social workers, but the districts themselves and the communities understand what a social worker could do ecologically and in a broad way. And that's really important, because otherwise, especially in states or districts where people don't know what social workers do, it's hard for one person to go in there, as Julie just mentioned, and try and reinvent, although we do it all the time as social workers. I could give you an example of one district that we did that we served as a technical assistant that this would do nationally. We moved into a district in San Diego with 145 schools and 200,000 kids, doing a technical assistance kinds of service to those districts. They had very few school social workers at the time. And although they wanted a lot of programs and mental health services, they actually had very few resources. Many of these districts were kind of resource deserts. They didn't have NGOs and other things around. So we realized that we had to build capacity and work with the regions, the counties, the others to actually build school social work services. And just like this law does, it provides money for more school social workers, but also how to use them and to think about how we work ecologically. So again, we are working towards creating loving, caring, supporting, growth promoting spaces, not just removing problems. That's what social worker, and a technical assistance center that backs that kind of way of thinking then collects data from all the voices, the students in particular, parents, teachers. Teachers need a lot of support right now during COVID and after. We're seeing the national numbers. There's a lot of stress, and social workers provide that too. And also culturally, dealing with issues of racism, social inequality, all those are mental health. And the Technical Assistance Center really builds that understanding. So in this particular set of districts that we were in San Diego, we were there for 4 or 5 years, we were able to reduce serious violence and bullying by over 50%, substance use by over 50%. And the best part is when the money was not already flowing in again, those were sustained for about 4 or 5 years and continue to go down because we believe that those social workers built the infrastructure. They made it sustainable. And that's why the combination of this technical assistance center in terms of evaluation and ground up and every school getting what it needs, not just a top-down, one-size-fits-all, is what we really stand for and work for. So we need that. It'll be in the Secretary's Office of Education at the federal level for the very first time. And this is super exciting because our way of seeing the world will then be showed in the Department of Education and nationally. And we have a different perspective. So everything you heard from our colleagues here, this bill is really, really critical and could change the way we actually see schooling from just a place where we maybe fix problems that are coming in from the community to a place where it's a welcoming, thriving, and fits our ideal of what we want our future to be in our society. And I think this bill has the potential to do that.
That's wonderful. And then Tiffany, do you want to top it off?
Yeah, I, like Ron, am most excited about the technical assistance aspect in this bill because we really do need to make sure that our workforce is not only continuously highly trained, but highly supported. We have to remember that education systems, districts, charter schools, whatever they may be, they're data-driven organizations. And so whenever we are in conversations at an education level and we're looking at student-driven data, all of that is centered around academic inputs and outputs. When I'm working with school social workers and as someone who works to support and train school social workers, I can see that they are definitely in more need and excited about very role-specific supports like data collection, intervention development, assessing program effectiveness. Many of us, because there is no formalized training that's offered to us, much like it's offered to our teacher colleagues. I mean, Julie spoke so well about it when she mentioned her mentor was a music teacher. Nice thought, but not super helpful, right? So when we are placed in these roles, a lot of the learning and the effectiveness that we bring to the table is because we're doing it independently and we're doing it, you know, proactively, and we're doing so innovatively, and we're doing a great job at it. But that additional support puts us in a position where we can then navigate and advocate to be decision makers and at the tables as we're looking at school district spending and program development, because data talks, right? And so if we have a technical assistance program where school social workers have a systemized process to collect data, whether it be the number of crisis interventions, the number of students who are referred out, the number of phone calls that school social workers make daily to coordinate services, the number of counseling minutes that we are providing students around certain areas, the number of teacher consultations that we're doing. If we can really create a systemized way to collect that data and then report that data out, we then have the ability to speak to our policymakers and our decision makers in the school system who are deciding where the data goes. data drives dollars. And I really believe that this technical assistance program is going to support that work. I'm very excited to see it. This is some of the work that I've been doing with some of the social workers in the schools that I support and I coach, but I would love to be able to see this at a national level that's also funded by our nation to really take this and have greater impact. So I'm very excited about the technical assistance piece because I really think it's going to be impactful.
Thank you all so much. And now I think we have some time for questions. And Christine is going to take that over.
Okay, great. So the first question, let's see here. I work in 2 schools and one school has 500 students. The other school has 300. One high school I work has at-risk teens and one is a K-8. We also identify students that may be in human trafficking and teach staff what that looks like. School social workers are needed in every school. To be honest, we need more than one in every school. So that's kind of what that looks like. Also, the next question is, would you recommend mental health first aid training implemented district-wide as a way to empower schools with the essentials of mental health? Or what training would you recommend to provide the knowledge on essentials of mental health?
I happen to actually be a certified mental health first aid trainer. And so I actually do think that it is one of the better programs that is out there to support the development and the training. We don't need our teachers to be social workers because they're teachers and they're great at teaching. And we don't need our school nurses to be social workers because they're nurses and they're great at being school nurses. But what we do need is for there to be a basic level of education for all students, or not all students, for all staff who touch and who have contact with students, so that they have the awareness of signs and symptoms that might indicate a mental health issue, and they have the ability to stabilize it, almost like a triage system in a hospital. They have the ability to stabilize or support a student until they can get connected to licensed professional help. And in this case, that would be a school social worker. And I think because so many schools are challenged with having enough social workers at the moment, making sure that all staff have a basic mental health literacy component in their training and their orientation assures that our students can be safely supported until the social worker can get there and do the better depth of the work.
And if I can just add, another thing that I really love about Youth Mental Health First Aid is that their ability to train community members and parents as well. So this training can help just everyone in the school community better understand child development and how to work with students who might be struggling with suicidal ideation or having a panic attack in the moment, being able to connect them, to help them through that moment and then connect them to school social workers and other services when necessary.
Okay, the next question is, Professor Astor, you said welcoming schools. What do you mean?
Thank you. That's a great question. So I love all the questions about interventions, but we haven't talked about prevention or optimal schools. So let me just say, social workers believe we have an image of what a great school should look like. And we think of all these resources and we think of people being supported in the organization and we think about all these things. And from our perspective, from all the research we've done with social workers, resources, how we treat each other on a day-to-day basis, not therapeutically only, not just with skills, if we give each other respect, if we look at each other in the eye, we've seen what's happening in the school boards, those are settings that we've studied and looked at, and those are very welcoming. They exist there. And the earlier example that I gave you of the San Diego districts, one of the things that we did is we didn't just want to remove problems. We wanted to see if we could transform some of those settings with the staff, the parents and kids into very welcoming places. So the first thing when a kid walks into the school, does somebody walk and say, like maybe Starbucks or Nordstrom's even, hello, how are you? How has your day been? Or when they leave, or transitions. Those are very minor things, but it means that you need to care, really care for each kid. Now, when we were able to do that, and by the way, we did that by infusing those schools with many, many social workers, as you're all talking about. Those schools not only had programs, they became prevention. So in other words, I told you there were 50% reductions, but what it also meant is kids who then attended that school after all those social workers had worked really hard on that for 3 or 4 years and had all these risk factors, if they attended that school, they actually never became bullies. They actually never became victims. They never even tried drugs. So it has a prevention quality because the place is so caring, so welcoming, so uplifting, so inspiring that the kids didn't go to gangs. There was actually a 40% gang reduction, actually in terms of even joining gangs. So the place became a place where many opportunities were created for kids. Kids wanted to go to school and parents wanted to interact there. So these are settings where people dialogue and there's sometimes disagreements, but they're uplifting and they're inspiring places. And I think that's our ideal, optimal place where we'd like to go with the Technical Assistance Center. We want to help with all the things that need to be helped now, of course, but we want to reach a place where schools could actually be so welcoming and so caring that those kids could see a future, and the teachers too and others that go far beyond what our current society is right now. We've researched it's possible to do that. And I think this ecological vision that we have in this law has that embedded and woven into it. So I'm really excited by that. And I could talk more about welcoming schools if you want to later, but those schools become protective settings for all the kids and families who attend them.
Okay, the next question is, can you address the role of school social workers in crisis risk assessments since COVID?
Can you repeat that again? I missed a part of it.
Yes. Can you address the role of school social workers in crisis risk assessments since COVID?
I think many of us have seen an increase in the need for students who have mental health support as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that isolation is one of the biggest symptoms that contributes to some of the more popular mood disorders such as anxiety and depression. And so oftentimes when students are returning back to school and they are exhibiting any signs or symptoms that can be concerning, social workers are the ones who are providing that risk assessment. And it looks different at different schools, but I know the CSSR is one of the most popular risk assessments that we use that came out of Columbia University. And it's an opportunity for us to question students, and actually anyone can question students regarding their thoughts, their ideas, to see how severe that crisis may be, whether it's ideation or ideation with intent. And as a result of the risk assessment, we're then able to provide the best intervention for students and families, whether that be immediate stabilization by sending to psychiatric evaluation or ongoing support, because what we're really seeing are some signs of hopelessness and frustration as a result of the isolation that's been experienced as a result of COVID. But I think me and all of my colleagues can agree that we've definitely seen an increase or an uptick in this as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, great. The next question is, what are ways school social workers can show their impact and their need?
Well, I think Tiffany mentioned it earlier, but data. It's really important for us to have the voice of the students, of the parents, and the administrators and district actually quantify, but also tell stories, case studies in terms of what has worked, and learn from those places that have really turn things around. And by the way, in our research all around the world, not just the United States during COVID, there are places that figured it out, that did really well. And we need this kind of research technical to go to them and to learn from them in terms of how they pull the resources together. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel on all this stuff. We could learn from ourselves and from others. And again, but we need some kind of coordinating way to show the impact, so it's not just personal storytelling at the individual level of each social worker, but we could show it as a collective. When we do collect data, by the way, from teachers, they highly, highly value social workers. And I think I'm thrilled that AFT is here, but we just did a congressional briefing last week with NEA and a variety of others, and social workers kept on coming up over and over again in the research in terms of how important they were for all the reasons that our panelists just mentioned over here, to really fill that social emotional level, not just during COVID, but afterwards. And I would hope that this would continue after COVID so that we could sustain it as well too, that districts would see the value and start integrating social workers into, just like in San Diego, without.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. So I just want to say thank you to our esteemed panelists, our wonderful social workers and advocates in this space. It's such a thought-provoking briefing, and just so, we need you all now more than ever, truly. And I also want to give a special thanks to Congresswoman Barbara Lee for being the lead co-sponsor of this bill, along with my boss, as well as her legislative assistant, Samira, for helping to plan this briefing and for all the work that she does. I want to say thank you as well to all of our participants. Please reach out if you have any questions, and we hope you can share the information you heard today with your offices. The webinar is now complete and you may disconnect.